Hi, welcome to Commander Runningcloud's vlog. I'm back again. I'm back with another show. I wanted to come back sooner, but I couldn't because a couple of things happened. And as usual, I'm going to digress from the main conversation and talk about the things that happened. When I was logging out of this session and I logged back in to start the next report, I found that somehow my connection was coming out of Sugar Land, Texas, which is 30 minutes away from here. If you take Highway 6 right outside there and you go down about a half an hour, you'll come to Sugar Land. When I first moved to Houston, Texas from Brownsville, after the cartel drove me out of Brownsville because I was doing my live broadcasts and they were doing child trafficking and something else out of the Pecan Inn there in Brownsville. They were up to some illegal activities, and by then they realized who I was and that I was a broadcaster. And I was just there waiting for Tina Ainley for that entire situation to work out because with the way the Arizona courts were after me, I was really afraid to travel. Plus, my car windshield was broken and my tires were bald, even though it was a brand new car and I just bought a tire. They stole a tire and put an old one in, so I'd already had to buy a tire. But they stole all the tires when they thought that Tina Ainley was going to succeed in getting me locked up in a mental institution on a Rule 11 or get me just out and out killed. Okay, so my team gave me the signal and I ran like hell to get out of Arizona. And I couldn't go west because when I went west, the Jews on Point Loma and the Europeans on Point Loma, where I was living, well, Roger had already given me a concussion by hitting me in the head with his cane, a 300 plus pound, 6'2" European man who vowed that he was going to get Black people out of the Orchard community, a senior community where I was living. And the police refused to prosecute Roger. And he told me that would happen. He told me that would happen, which is because that's how racism works. That's the environment we're in. Juan Luis told me that if I try to put him out of my home with the police, that the police were going to end up taking me instead. So one of the lies that the Europeans tell is that justice is for everyone, when in reality, they use law enforcement against the Native people to discredit us, criminalize us, and enable us to take control of our lands and properties. So I couldn't go west to San Diego because I had to flee San Diego and I had to be homeless for like 2 days, 3 days. I had to sleep in my car, driving around, trying to decide, am I going to live in New Mexico? Am I going to live in Arizona? And I settled on Phoenix, Arizona, and I was able to get a place, and that was great. But after I started documenting the infrastructure, the European nationalists were creating a brand new infrastructure in Phoenix, Arizona while I was there. They were stealing water from the ponds on the Pima Reservation. They were running water right by the Indians in south of Phoenix, the Indian community south of Phoenix. They had a concrete canal that just rushed the stolen water right by. They were building golf courses all around with no people in them, homes with no residents, but golf courses with plenty of water features, because they were draining Lake Mead and draining Lake Roosevelt and draining unnamed small ponds and stealing all the water from the Indians, just like they did to make Lake Mead. Okay? And that's all documented in a story written down by a European anthropologist of, golly, I can't remember the American's name. I can remember these things when I'm not on the spot. But anyway, the American Indians living in the Arizona Four Corners, in Arizona, Utah, they were documenting the drought, which is really caused by Europeans stealing the water. Well, I was documenting them stealing the water. I was documenting them installing these huge concrete cylinders underground. That was why the light rail, that's why a Gallego, a woman with epilepsy who didn't even have her driver's license, but was somehow elected mayor of Phoenix. And she was enabling them to do public transportation that was really all about digging up the land and installing these underground things. Well, by the time I'm in Scottsdale, and they're really starting to build, and I'm starting to film these great big things behind the wall, well, they really got mad at me. And that was when they sent the kidnappers after me. And that was when Tina Ainley brought me into her court and tried to lock me up. So when I fled Arizona, I couldn't go west, because west was Roger and the San Diego police that were ready to and the San Diego psychiatric hospital, that were all willing to take my liberty, okay? Because they're not going to let me have my wealth, because they don't want me to undermine the European nationalist plans for world conquest. So I couldn't go west. I had to go east into Texas, even though ever since the Texas Rangers and the defeat of Mexico, the Europeans in Texas were known. And after the Nazis got here, the Europeans in Texas were known for the most brutal abuses using law enforcement. Most brutal abuses publicized in the media came out of Texas. They took a man whose last name was Byrd, B-Y-R-D, and they dragged him through the streets, tied to a pickup truck, as late as the 1990s, right here in Texas. Recently, Abbott released a man who had killed Black people. I mean, if the cartels weren't so fierce, they would have just wiped out the Mexicans here, okay? But as it is, the Mexicans have been able to make a living of sorts, but they're still not, welcome in places like Sugar Land. So when I'm leaving Brownsville under coercion from people in the cartel, because now that I've talked to Sue Ann Decker, and they've decided to drop the case against me in the Arizona Superior Court, I'm starting to feel, more free. I'm starting to feel more relaxed. I'm starting to feel like I'm not going to be, dragged away and locked up as a political prisoner. But that made me more threatening to the Mexicans at the Pecan, in rooms at the Pecan in Brownsville. And by now I've gone and I've documented that the port is privately owned, and and I'm showing films of one tanker after another with oil and gas and other precious things from America being shipped on private trains right through a private railroad station, all blocked off, into a private port. I didn't even know the ports were private until I'm sitting in the parking lot looking at all these trains exporting American property. And then the police come around, and they're not Europeans. They were Mexicans or Blacks, I'm not sure which. But, they pay them to be the enforcement against their own people. So I'm there sitting in the parking lot. Nobody's parked there. I think it's kind of weird, but it's post-COVID, so everything's kind of weird. And the cops come and they say, you can't park here. And I say, yeah, but ports are public. This is a public parking lot. I'm just, enjoying some fresh air. And they said, ports are not public. This is private property. And they want you gone, which is something I've heard about a million times on property that I thought was public, because it's exporting property that belongs to me from places like Oklahoma, where my land is being robbed and stripped of mineral resources, precious metals. So I find out that the ports are private, and I'm documenting that. And I go to the university at the border, and I find that the border is totally blocked up, and that the university at the border of Brownsville has no students. It looks like the university that I found in Penn, the Keuka College in Penn, that obviously had no students. And I've been to elementary schools in Phoenix that had no students. So I already knew that they were calling industrial processing centers for smuggling goods, schools, hospitals, malls, high-rise corporations, right? So I'm noticing that at the ends at the Pecan, I'm noticing, people are coming in on my live stream, and I didn't enable the live stream. So I don't know what to think about that. The mayor of India, I am targeted too. Okay. Who's this Nubian queen? Oh, thank you. Well, I guess, I don't know. I guess I'm live. So I thought I disabled live, but I have to continue telling my story. I don't mean to ignore you, audience. I just have to keep telling my story for a little while. But hello from Gaza, from Demushe, the mayor of India. Well, I don't know if this is real. I guess it is. Well, thank you so much for joining me on my live stream today. So anyway, in Brownsville, after the pressure's off me, I start documenting life in Brownsville beyond the way that they're interfering with the business, the Chinese food restaurant business of Lynn's. And I'm noticing how the highways are. I'm noticing the same street gangs that we had in Arizona. I'm seeing the young Mexican Americans locked behind locked behind gates, not participating in the economy. And I'm starting to document all this. So at the ends of the Pecan, there were people that were coming into work there. And the rooms were very small, smaller than this room is. Maybe 300, maybe 200 square feet of hotel room. And people were coming in every day, and they were going into one of the units, and then would be gone for 8 hours. And they weren't in the rooms, because by then I started to walk a little more around the grounds, and I could see there was no one in the hotel room at all. Do you use a Faraday cage to keep them from reading your thoughts too? Do you think the Pleiadians will defeat the beings from Orion? Or what about the Galactic Federation of Light? Well, these are obviously people that know my broadcast, so thank you for joining me. It's nice not to be alone. But I thought I disabled live, so I'm a little confused. And I hope that I really am live, because if I have to repeat this, it's going to be hard to recall everything, and I'll be tired soon. So anyway, once I start noticing that the people are coming to work every day, but they're going to some kind of underground facility, and there are all kinds of big fields, big concrete, big processing centers, plenty of room for underground facilities. And the restaurant I'm going to almost seems like a hub for child trafficking. And by this time, I've seen 2 Europeans come and spend the day there with two little boys who were also around. So the men at the ends of the Pecan really started to feel threatened by my presence. And they, in the middle of my contract, they demanded that I leave in the middle of the night. So I had to go to a hotel where they break into your car and stay there until I figured out how to get out of there. So I decided I had to drive north, right? Even though my windshield was broken. And I said, okay, Houston, Texas is the next city. They're going to have people that can fix my car there, because Brownsville was so small that I really didn't think that they would be able to fix my vehicle and get me the new wheels and everything. And it was a border town. So I just, and it had already been robbed. I just wanted to go a little north. So I was heading to Houston. But the first big town I came to was Sugarland. Okay? And in Sugarland, I tried to get an Airbnb. And a woman named Yafa canceled my reservations. They had to pay a cancellation fee to get rid of me because she didn't want me in her hotel room. Now, they were using Roku in their hotel room. And I knew from Juan Luis that Roku was a way they could hack into your phone and your computer system. That Roku comes with built-in malware. So they were saying that if I was going to stay there, I was going to have to use Roku. So I was going to question that. But before that happened, Yafa, who was the agent for a man who owned a lot of properties that he put on Airbnb. He owned a lot of properties that he put up on Airbnb. And Yafa was his property manager. And Yafa called me and they canceled my reservation. They did not want me in their property at all. Wow, look at this. I'm getting so many messages. Thank you so much for joining me. And I promise you I will read all of these messages after my broadcast. But I have notes, so I have an agenda. But I'll try to get to your notes soon. Oh, wow, I never had a live audience talking to me. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so there I am fleeing Brownsville because I've been kicked out of Brownsville by the cartel, and I'm moving north to Houston. But by now, I've got the road gangs, okay? I've got great big trucks releasing big black smoke on me while we're driving on the highway. A truck will come, they'll go and release all this black smoke to fly on my car. So I don't know if they're trying to poison me. And it's very obvious to me that the road gangs are still pursuing me, that I'm still being tracked across America by the enemies of American liberty. So I get to Sugarland. And while I'm staying in a hotel, I'm trying to get into this Airbnb. And I'm all set up to go to the Airbnb, and they canceled just like that. So I had to book another night in the hotel. And I think the Airbnb gave me a credit towards a room or something. It wasn't a satisfactory conclusion to the problem. But a woman named Yafa, they just decided they didn't want me because they found out who I was. And I'm sure they didn't want me in there with their Roku doing my cybersecurity work on what they had going on there. So Yafa, they paid the fine, everything. So there I am. I'm saying, oh my God, well, I can't stay in Sugarland. And I didn't want to come to Houston because it's a big city. And driving through these big cities can be very tough, especially when you've got road gangs that are blocking your exits and you've got highways that are sabotaged. So it says it's a plain highway and then it says exit only all of a sudden. But you got the road gang blocking you in. And that's the way they play the game. And I knew that from all my driving. I didn't want to come into Houston. But I had to come into Houston anyway. But while I was in Sugarland, somebody broke into my car at the hotel. I get up and I find the trunk of my car open. So it's not so much to break into my car as it is to intimidate and frighten me that they can break into my car. And then when I went to the mall, a man was actually following me. I could actually see him following me. And he went into a closed real estate office while I went into the grocery store. And then he managed to come out. So he was obviously following me. Okay? So I knew that Sugarland was being hostile. Then after I get to this hotel in Houston, I have to go to Sugar Land periodically to go to the Apple store to get my machine cleaned, with the hopes that somehow I'll get rid of all of the hacking that Juan Luis put in there when he hacked the Target in 2013. But I couldn't. But I still had to go there to the Apple store in Sugar Land. But when I went to the Apple store in Sugar Land, the Europeans would make it hard for me to find the entrance to the mall when I drive just from here straight down the road past the Shell campus, where there was plenty of green grass, and there was always some Jeeps coming out of the Shell facility. That's all black wrought iron, all beautiful green grass, and militarized Jeeps that would come out of there. So when you're driving on 16, when I was driving on 16, it was always kind of dangerous because a lot of cars would be behind me. And if it was evening, they would shine their bright lights that burnt my contact lenses and hurt my eyes very much. So it's always stressful. But then when I get to Sugar Land and I can't find the entrance to the mall, and the entrance to the mall is so convoluted, just like the malls in Phoenix, and they've got all the road gangs waiting there. Well, one time I was going into the mall and a European woman actually bumped me like that and knocked me and hurt me. So they made it very clear that the European nationalists run Sugar Land, that they wouldn't even let me stay at the Airbnb. Okay? So when I get on my computer tonight, hours ago when I first wanted to do this broadcast, I see that somehow my traffic is being routed to Sugar Land. And I know that Sugar Land is doing, infiltration on my Wi-Fi. This is public Wi-Fi. Anybody can break in, especially experts in Roku technology. So I had to just wait. I had to wait and say, well, maybe they'll get tired and go to sleep. Maybe they have jobs. So I'll wait until it's later to do my broadcast. And that's why it took me so long to get here, to talk about culture war. Okay, culture war. I made some mistakes in my last broadcast. The Huns are Asians. I don't know the name of the Germans, but I put the helmet on the last broadcast. The helmet that those men with the big handlebar mustaches have. And I'll also tell you that I think they distort my face on these videos. I don't think I have a white mustachy place, but I've just noticed that they seem to accentuate different parts of my face so that I'll be hesitant to show my face in here. But the kind of German, the Russian looks like a German. And I also got the wrong name for Brittany Griner. It wasn't Tiffany. It's Brittany Griner. So those are some mistakes I made. I made other mistakes too. You might have spotted them. Oral conversations are harder. Okay. War kills the mind first. Cultural unity, cultural history, and cultural memory. Once you've destroyed that, you can tell a people anything you want. Okay. I first learned about culture war by reading Chinua Achebe. Chinua Achebe is an Igbo author from Nigeria. And the Igbo people might be known in America as the Biafrans. When the blood libelists in broadcasting decided to bring Africa into America through the news, we already had Tarzan, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed European wearing a loincloth with a great build, who was illiterate and couldn't talk. And you'd see him with animals, And when you saw Africans with Tarzan, the Africans were just carrying the things that belonged to the Europeans that were more civilized than Tarzan. So when the Europeans first introduced Africa to the public media of America, they did it with Tarzan. And, okay, degrading, embarrassing, humiliating. So when the Europeans decided to bring Africa in through the news, they did it by saying that African children are starving because the Yoruba people, but they didn't call them the Yoruba. They didn't say the Yoruba and the Igbo are having a disagreement. Okay? And they also didn't say that the Jews and the blacks in America are having a disagreement, not that different. Okay? They didn't talk about themselves. They talked about Nigeria to present this whole image of Nigerian children as poor and starving, as Nigerian people as at war with each other and destroying themselves for being different ethnic groups. They presented this whole narrative of Biafra that created a whole culture in America saying, a child in Africa would be happy to have the food you're eating, right? And this whole idea of their children starving all over the world, that was the narrative that came in with Biafra, which isn't even a place. It was about the Igbo people. Well, Chinua Achebe, a very literate, very brilliant writer who's now gone, he's the one who wrote the books that made me understand how culture war works. The first seeds of culture war were started, in my mind, by Achebe. Ironically, around the time that they're talking about the war in Biafra, my family can't make enough money for me to get enough food. I'm the starving child in America. My mother, as a single school teacher, driven out of New York by crooked real estate markets, driven to divorce by economic deprivation, among other things, driven out of Oklahoma, oil land by the terrorists, driven up north with her college degree, thinking that she could have a life as good as any other American, any European American. My family believed this. They didn't know that they were walking right into a trap made by the real estate agents and the people that owned the employment market in New York City. They thought New York City, you could rise as high as you could achieve, and they knew that they were honor students from Langston University. They knew they were brilliant, and they came from oil land. But the Depression, the Dust Bowl, the Ku Klux Klan, the Osage Indian genocide, the Cherokee Trail of Tears, all of these things, all of these acts of war by the Europeans culminated in my family thinking that they'd have a better chance up north. They didn't know they were walking right into a trap that would take all of their savings with fraud in business that my grandmother faced with her cosmetic store on Reed Street in Brooklyn, where they still have a cosmetic store. So it was a good spot. And my grandmother was brilliant. There was no reason that she should have gone bankrupt except for the crooked deals. And then my parents buying a house, but then the house is a trap because they cannot make enough money, even with the two of them. They cannot make enough money in New York, and they're working for immigrants from World War II. They're working for the Jews from World War II. And they're coming home angry and hurt and talking about it. Okay? They're talking about the way that their bosses don't even have just high school graduate immigrants. Okay? So immigrants as a topic, immigrants are a huge weapon in the culture war. Immigrants have been deployed on the American people, on the landowners, the real Americans, over and over and over again. We don't just have the immigrants after World War I when they had the union breakers from Italy come here. Not just them. Then World War II brought us the Germans and the Jews who really preyed upon our economy even more. And then the Vietnam War brought us the Vietnamese who were given the money to start grocery stores in places that had evolved into ghettos. They created ghettos and then created immigrants to get the wealth so that the people would have resentments, right? So they give the stores to the to the Vietnamese. And then they have the Korean War and they bring the Koreans in, and the Koreans get the nail industry. If you looked at who was having a nail salon, a lot of Koreans. I mean, in some places in New York, there's so many nail salons that there just aren't enough fingers to get done. But it became the immigration path. And then in the nursing industry, they allowed an influx of Filipino women. And the Filipino women hated the Black women. And the Black women were getting more and more certification and licenses as bachelor degree nurses. But then the Filipino women drove them back, and into the worst jobs in the profession, for the real Americans in nursing. And then they let the H1 East Indians in to decimate the technology population. All the Americans that got computer science degrees in technology were just shoved out. So over and over again, Europeans have used immigration as a way to control the progress, the success, and the economic prosperity of the real Americans. So when you see this border crisis, you have to understand that in the mind of the European nationalists, the real Americans are no longer a threat. They know they can go in Arizona and have their way and steal all the water and let the water run right by the Indian communities. They know this. They know that the Black people can all be sent to jail. You just have to look at the color of the face of the driver in the car and pull them over and say you smell weed or you smell liquor and just put them in your system of prison. But they got so bad that they don't even have to have an excuse to throw you in jail, which is what happened to me, right? In this generation, the European nationalists are very bold about seizing property and breaking the law and violating, because they know they own the judiciary, they know they own broadcasting, they know they own everything that you might use to save yourself. Okay? So tonight there's also a lot of noise behind my wall where they did that building, where the military soldiers with the Pettis family did all that building behind the wall late at night. They're running a big loud machine in there tonight. And I don't know if it's just a part of the oil and gas industry that's hiding machines inside buildings, or if it's a new weapon to deploy on me. I don't know. So I've got a lot of complex post-traumatic stress going on after I see Sugarland. Because it's been many, many days since Sugarland has gotten control of my Wi-Fi. Okay. So, okay, bye now. Thank you so much. Have a nice day. Keep up the video journals. That's pretty biased of you to say. Biased means cool. Oh, based. Based means cool. Thank you. Wow, that's so cool. Wow. All right. So I learned about culture war. The first seeds of culture war were put into my mind by Chinua Achebe, whose people were being used to denigrate the Africans and to create this narrative that Africans are so debased that they murder each other and leave each other to starve. Meanwhile, the Europeans in America are starving me in Washington, D.C. Okay? In Washington, D.C., after the divorce. I'm not on the farm with my grandmother where she can just get a chicken, where they can just pick a watermelon out of the yard, where they can just get green beans and lima beans that I do not like, but they can just get the corn, everything right in the yard. You're not going to be hungry when you have your own farm, right? But they drove us all north, and now they can control the food supply. They can control the incomes. They can control what I get. And as I'm a child in Washington, D.C., I'm growing up hungry. I couldn't get enough food. My mother couldn't afford lunch for us, except bologna sandwiches, and the nitrates in bologna gave me a headache. So it was poisoned. Okay? Also in Washington, D.C. at this time, my baby sister got hit by a European from Maryland driving a pickup truck. The children are all walking home from school, and our low-income housing, I'm going to call it that, is right across the street. And there's a big highway there between us and our school. And a European comes speeding through the yellow light. And I'm supposed to be keeping an eye on my sister, right? But I'm laughing with my cousins. And the next time I see my sister, I hear the screech of wheels, and I see my sister way across the street, starting to come conscious and sit up because a European hit her. And my mother took them all to court, and my mother was incredibly disappointed with the results. Incredibly disappointed with the way the European judiciary handled that car truck accident. And the more I learned about Europeans, the more I thought that that wasn't an accident at all. That anybody speeding through a school zone when children are getting out of school might be a psychopath with a truck trying to kill American children. It might have been a Jeffrey Epstein behind the wheel there. But that wasn't so good for my sister. And it wasn't so good for my family. It was just another horrifying trauma in a stream of horrifying traumas. And when you have one horrifying trauma after another in the land of opportunity, you really start to feel like a misfit. Like, how come all these bad things are happening to me? And they're happening to me because they are orchestrated. They're orchestrated to happen to the land-owning heirs of American property that the Europeans covet. And in Oklahoma, I had a lot of that coming to me. So while the Europeans are creating this narrative to set a public reputation of Africans as being contentious, as having no compassion for each other, as being so poor and hungry that any American child, even an American child eating bologna, is eating better than a child in Africa could ever eat. Okay? Coming behind Tarzan. So you grew up with Tarzan, and then when you're starting to be prepubescent, you start to hear about Biafra. And it doesn't occur to you, gee, I'm starving too. The Europeans are starving me, but they're telling me about Africans starving. Well, by the time Ronald Reagan came along, they were making ketchup a vegetable. And more Americans, real Americans, Black Americans than ever were relying on public school breakfast from and public school lunch. What was the name of that group? You Start, Fresh Start. There was some kind of group that actually did. I don't remember the name of it, but they actually had public funding for a school that prepares children for school. And they would have a free breakfast. And my mother would give us, we would go with my mother to Head Start to get free breakfast. Okay? And a lot of times, if you didn't eat bologna, you didn't have lunch. And I didn't eat bologna. So I remember being hungry a lot through my childhood. And I remember being hungry a lot through my college days too, because my family was somehow never able to reach economic prosperity, despite the fact that we were landowners. We just got less and less and less. So Chinua Achebe, in his book, Arrow of God, Things Fall Apart, and there was another one too. He talked about the way the Europeans would isolate and break up community coherence, the way that they would take the weakest link and prop that link up. They would take the weakest link and give him power to use against the people that would have risen through their natural talents and abilities. And through reading Chinua Achebe, he did a very, very good job of fictionalizing the way a society can crumble when you've got a culture war in effect from your enemies that use your own people as well as external systems to break up your culture, to break up your traditions, to break up your government. So that seed was planted in my mind with Chinua Achebe, who I read in Leon Forrest's class back in the 1970s. And that's how my interest in culture war really got started. And I really started to recognize it as culture war when I saw more and more stereotypes being deployed in public broadcasting that were creating negative stereotypes of my people. My people kept coming up again and again and again. If you wanted to see a criminal, if the criminal was European, there'd be no picture on the article. And my mother brought this up to us. But if the criminal was a real American with dark skin, well, there was a picture. There was a picture. When they wanted to talk about welfare mothers abusing the welfare system, they didn't say that mostly Europeans are on welfare and that a lot of Jews from World War II made their living on welfare and disability for mental illnesses. They didn't talk about that at all. They talked about Black welfare mothers. They talked about Spanish surnamed welfare mothers. Black and brown people became the face for public aid. And they didn't say, oh, you know why these people are on public aid? Because we planned it that way. We created ghettos. And then we made sure that they couldn't participate equally in the economic system. And then we imported immigrants and gave the immigrants their business licenses to make a living on them because we had them in ghettos just like we tested amongst ourselves in Germany. All of these things are aspects of culture war. When you erase a people's tradition and history and substitute a denigrating, degrading, negatively motivated history in its place, you're conducting culture war. Rap music was culture war. Listen to Boyz II Men. Boyz II Men was one of the last groups that really represented Black artistry in music. And they were quickly replaced by NSYNC and the other European boy groups. Just like when Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5 were super popular, the Osmond Brothers created a song, One Bad Apple Don't Spoil the Whole Bunch, Girl, that sounded so much like the Jacksons that everybody was confused. And then the Europeans put their supply chain, economic and financial money changer power behind the Europeans. But we still had Motown, right? We still had Motown going. Okay, they're blowing bad air in here. They got the machines running behind the walls. And it's kind of triggering me, but I'm going to try to keep going. Culture war. Music. Rap music. Boyz II Men. Boyz II Men was singing, I'll be good to you like you want me to. I will hold you tight. Okay? They're singing songs of love. Before that, you had Stevie Wonder singing, songs of social consciousness, songs of love and social consciousness. Look Around, Village Ghetto Land. And his Songs in the Key of Life was one of the last albums in the real Black music era. So you got Stevie Wonder, you got Marvin Gaye. They dragged Marvin Gaye through the privately owned IRS. We all thought the IRS was going to make public works. We all thought the IRS was going to build our highways and our infrastructure. We all thought the IRS was going to fund public works for better life for all of us. We had no idea that the IRS was going to fund private industry and give private industry a pass on paying taxes, and the wealthy a pass on paying taxes. We had no idea that the IRS was another form of sharecropping, another form of paying the lords of the manor and the royals. We had no idea that the IRS was simply the economic branch that created peasants of Americans. Yet, we'll say former slaves, but we don't call the Europeans peasants because they never became royalty. They are still peasants. And they made us peasants too. And under peasants, what are we, serfs? We're under the peasant class of Europeans because of the force. So when American music was still being controlled by black art, you had men like Herbie Hancock blowing the lid off of jazz on the leading edge, using all of the instruments in a classical European orchestra to create a music that was modern and contemporary, that tied in with the American energy, the American spirit. And you might see that movie Swing Kids, about how Germans and the Berliners loved jazz, and how the Jews came and started to play jazz too and occupy jazz as a part of their musical environment, yet never letting jazz rise higher than the Europeans. Oh my God, they're blowing so much bad smoke in here. They're blowing so much of that bad marijuana smoke in here, it's giving me a headache. Oh, there they are. There they are. There they are. A lot of thugs. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. I got 7 of them out there. 7 of them out there. Wow. I would show you, but it's you might not be able to see. You got 7 men out there smoking weed and blowing it in through this air conditioner. Plus, the machines behind the wall are so loud. I haven't heard them that loud in weeks and weeks and weeks. And Sugarland. So my broadcast today must have really triggered my enemies, the enemies of America, because they are really, really making me angry here. Okay, but let me go on. Culture war, music. That's the topic, okay? I've already mentioned libraries, that they removed libraries from our communities so that we couldn't learn anything beyond what they force-fed us. I could talk about video games and how all the video games turned out to be about war after the RPGs, after the role-playing games. Okay, and how many of the video games were about war strategy, death, killing people. Dune was one of the video games that made everybody say, hey, too much blood and gore, but it just got worse from there. Okay, it just got worse from there because that's the European mindset. They want everybody to want war. They want everybody to crave death. They don't want people living on their farmlands playing music about how much they love their mothers and their wives and their children. And that was what we had. So you had Stevie Wonder and his songs in the key of life with a lot of social commentary. You had Marvin Gaye, Mercy, Mercy Me, What's Going On? And with Marvin Gaye, they took him and just dragged him through their courts and took his little tender soul and just decimated all of his idealism. Did you know that Marvin Gaye actually spent months in Germany with a German family before he was murdered here by his own father? I like to think he wasn't really murdered, that he just went underground and his father helped him disappear so he could get off the European drugs, cocaine that had him strung out, and he could get rid of the German mind control from when he went to Germany, and he could get out of the scope of the Europeans that wanted to kill him for making everybody look and think. Mercy, mercy me. Look at the ecology. Look at the economy. Look at the world we are moving into. Well, the Europeans didn't want that. They didn't want American art to continue to make people think and challenge the narratives they wanted to enforce on us. So we get the boy bands taking over the economic success that belonged to boys to men. We get rappers, the girl rappers like TLC and Salt and Pepper. We get them replaced by a European who's introduced by the blacks in the rap game, in the violent, nasty counterculture, culture war rap game. Those blacks introduced Pink, who's still making a career. She was just in Europe. Pink still has a career, and she made it through rap. Okay? Justin Bieber. And finally, Taylor Swift dominates the music market with those lame ballads that appropriate culture and talk about heartbreak and what a loser she is. Okay? And she's a girl who would find it hard to find a husband because of her body. She's so much bigger than most of the men here in America in her race. So she was going to be destined to have kind of a hard time finding a husband because she might be looking for a husband that's bigger and taller than she is. But she becomes the emblem of the millennials who are all romantically displaced because now that the Europeans feel they have the real Americans contained and defeated, they start to work on people in their own race. Okay? And that's why you get this new migrant group coming through, a huge group of migrants that are going to replace the people in the suburbs, aren't they? They're going to replace the Europeans that are on top because they're too expensive, aren't they? It's too expensive to support all of those high maintenance Europeans. So they've imported a lot of new immigrants to take care of their own people, haven't they? Because they've already proven through deploying immigration as a weapon, as a cultural war weapon against the real American landowners and heirs, they've already proved that immigration is a great weapon. So now they're using it big scale, right? Big scale. Okay. So the Europeans gain complete control of music production and music distribution. You cannot produce a record and get it distributed if you don't go through the European producers and money lenders, right? Just like David Axelrod in Chicago, who my stepfather had to go through to get permission and access to become a multi-millionaire, billionaire in Chicago. He had to go through that gate. Well, the Europeans created a great big gate in the music industry. And instead of Herbie Hancock, you had that guy that played the flute. Remember that guy that played the flute who took the place of the black jazz musicians? And he started getting all the money. And you don't even hear much from Herbie Hancock. But when you do hear from him in his album, The River, he blows the lid off. He blows the lid off. So you wonder, wow, how far would music have advanced? How many American musicians would have been able to make a living and make money and have children and wives that they can't afford now? Because after the Europeans took over jazz, they used Wynton Marsalis to destroy jazz. So all the jazz musicians that played the double bass, that played the bass, the violin, the cello, that played the flute, the piccolo, the saxophone, the alto sax, all of those musicians were put out of business. But guess what? God was still creating people with those special talents and the drive. But all that drive just ended up in prison, feeding a European investor prison industry and loaded up with drugs. Loaded up with drugs. Drugs to ease the despair of not being allowed to live your true destiny, of being consigned to the fate that the European nationalists have prepared for you. Because they understand our culture and they know exactly how to put a great big barrier between you and your cultural destiny. They know how to make your culture crumble right under your feet. So we had beautiful music being created, and it was mostly coming from a monopoly, right? So they had pretty much engineered things with movie contracts for Diana Ross and other kinds of manipulation that created fighting within groups. You'd had all these groups working together, Lamont Dozier, Lamont creating music. You had all of these collaborationists working together in Detroit, in Chicago with Chess Records. And then you had the Europeans closing in on them, picking fights with them, making them into the Igbos and the Yorubas, and then broadcasting that. Until finally, we see Diana Ross playing Mahogany, a drug-addicted, sadomasochistic wreck, putting hot wax all over her body, skinny and not very pretty, if you ask me. And then she displaces Stephanie Mills in a great movie, The Wiz. And we got her old ass pretending she's Dorothy with her lousy hairdo. And she's pretending she's Dorothy instead of Stephanie Mills, who made The Wiz popular in the first place. So then we're all the real Americans are bitter about this, right? So we're getting more and more angry with Diana Ross, who's sort of like, the emblem, the cover girl for Motown. So we're starting to not like Motown by the time they killed Motown. By the time they killed Motown, we're thinking someday we'll be together. I don't think so, honey. Because you took the money and you left Flo to die in the ghetto and you left Mary to make it by herself. You broke up the trio and had an affair with Berry Gordy and had his bastard children out of wedlock and messed up his marriage and seduced Michael Jackson. I mean, it just became one bad thing after another associated with Motown. So all the public support for Motown began to fall down, just like the Igbo and the Yoruba. And that made it very easy for the culture war to successfully take out the music industry leader that was creating all of this social commentary and social consciousness and love music for you and me. Next thing we know, Debbie Harry is having rap in her song and making rap go mainstream with Debbie Harry. Because one of the great rappers was there. But when you listen to those early rappers, okay, rap started as the conversation in a song. And when I was in college, if a man said, I got to get my rap together, it meant his love talk. It meant his courting language. A rap was the way you were going to approach girls. It was your line, okay? That was your rap, was your way to get a woman's attention and let her know you were interested in her. That was what a rap was when I was in college. So the love songs would have a sequence, like take them to the bridge. There was a bridge. But then in the romantic love songs, there would also become a rap. Hi, my name is Larry. I'm a Sagittarius, right? And then the man would be teaching other men in the community things you could say when you want to strike up a conversation with a lady you'd like to get to know romantically. And that's where rap music started. It started as a part of ballads where the man would pretend that he was having a conversation with a lady he wanted to like. And then with Grandmaster Flash and the Sugar Hill Gang, it moved on to them talking about, this ghetto life is so contrived for misery. Look at what they've got us living in. It was kind of a continuation of Marvin Gaye's Mercy, Mercy Me. But then they reconfigured rap music completely, didn't they? They reconfigured rap music completely and made it about the lowest class criminals in the race. And by then they had created a lot of low class criminals by excluding people from the economy and creating ghettos as the primary living space. So they had a lot of people who could only go to crime. Crime was the only career opportunity available to them. You know, in The Sims, which I love so much, they actually had a career path called crime. And that was like the first time I really thought, oh my God, they are so right. Crime is a career path that people select or are forced into. Crime is a career in the European nationalist society. Crime is a career. Sure, it's against God. Sure, it's against Christianity, but hadn't they already kind of moved us away from that? We no longer had Davy and Goliath on TV on Sundays teaching children Christian morality, right? And Christian morality, you know, tried to tell people don't steal, don't kill, don't hurt each other, don't lie, don't disrespect your families. Try to be decent human beings. Try to grow together. They took that right off the air. They took Walt Disney and all those wholesome stories. They brought Werner von Braun on, and then they just sent Walt Disney down the toilet. And then the next thing we hear about Walt Disney is that he was a Nazi and that Disneyland was a child trafficking hub. That's the next thing we hear about Walt Disney. But who Walt Disney was when I was coming up was a source of wholesome child entertainment. You know, Song of the South had a black man, an old black man with white hair, singing songs and playing with children. He was a beautiful, wholesome representation of Black American masculinity. And Disney, and the propaganda from the culture war said, "Oh, that's racist." Real racism was okay, but positive images of black people they would call racism and make those images go away. So they removed Song of the South. They removed Dumbo, where the crows were black voices, you know, that would help Dumbo find his true heroic character. So they want to call racism anything beneficial and then throw it away like Aunt Jemima, like, Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben. Just get rid of them because they're positive reflections of Black cultural history. Cuisine, cooking, growing the crops and then cooking the crops. The finest food in the world. American Black people on the East Coast. You have to be specific, the East Coast. East of the Mississippi, best food in the world. Because of the diversity of crops, the people were able to create wonderful recipes. People still talk about the food in New Orleans, as being the best, which I don't agree. I don't like swampy food, but they still had a reputation for cuisine, and it was a hub for slave trade, slave auction. It was a hub for Europeans trading in black flesh. And it became known for its cuisine because Black people were cooking. Black people were cooks. If you were a rich European, you had Black domestics cooking. Blacks even cooked food and delivered it to the Europeans as caterers. That was an economy, okay? So I've talked about rap music and how the Europeans gained complete control of music distribution and production, and then they decided the music that Black people would be represented by. And they threw jazz away, okay? Because all that, new age airy music that they made, it didn't last. It didn't last. It's like listening here on YouTube. Have you heard the Europeans playing the steel drums and meditative music on YouTube? And somehow it just doesn't grab you. And you have to say, wait a minute, did they automatically go into the feet of a European musician? Because I'm not feeling this. It doesn't feel like there's any soul in it. Like when you're listening to East Indian mantras or Black American stuff from the old days. It just doesn't drag you in. And you can tell it's an imposter. It's an imposter. An imposter got in there and created this stolen music, using steel drums, using Tibetan crystals. Okay, there's no soul of Tibet in there. It's devoid of funk, as Parliament would say. It's devoid of the essence of the people that created the music, like Taylor Swift. Okay, so let's continue with this culture war conversation. Rap music became co-opted by the Europeans, who found the least worthy people and elevated them to positions of wealth. Okay? Now, we've later found out that a lot of them got pulled into the Jeffrey Epstein snare, and a lot of them aren't even producing music much anymore. But Taylor Swift is still out there. Pink is still out there. Beyonce seems to have gone away. Okay? And then we got, BAP, Nicki Minaj and Cardi B. And I still like them, but their music is very, very sexual, right? But you have to like somebody, right? You want to like somebody. But then Megan Thee Stallion, I think she's bragging about being a transsexual being, right? So she was coming in with that. Okay, so rap music became a weapon against the Black American people, and they distributed it all over the world, and they associated it with a fashion sense. But all over the world, the reputation of my people became that we're criminals, that we don't respect our mothers and our grandmothers and our wives, that all of our men are criminals that want to get drunk and do drugs and abuse us. It became a really horrible picture. And it was on that I decided to go to graduate school and try to change things. Try to say, I'm sorry, but my people, education was our big thing. If you look at W.E.B. Du Bois, he said, let's say that there is a top 10% of the Black American people. Let these top 10% make it their duty to inspire the other 90% to rise culturally, to rise as a civilization. That was what Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, preached, the father of sociology, group dynamics. That was what he preached for us. Rap music did exactly the opposite. And it spread that reputation all over the world. So people all over the world, just like they look at the Africans and say, they fight with each other, they kill each other, they're hungry, they're dirty, they're uncivilized people. Even Tarzan and his loincloth and Jane are more civilized, swinging through the trees like apes. The ape man European is more worthy than all the Africans, while the Africans are in the shadow of the film, carrying the possessions of the European expedition. And Tarzan is their guide, leading them through his land. It's Tarzan's land. And then the music producers, they become Tarzan, leading all the Black Americans through Tarzan, through the jungle of my people. So I wanted to go to graduate school and create a conflicting narrative to this public opinion, because I'd already seen how it filters out in business. I had people from India coming into the computer industry where I was and thinking I was an ignorant rapper, that my people at home were ignorant rappers. They didn't know that my great-grandmother went to college. My great-grandmother was a benefactress of Langston University, as well as a student there. My great-grandfather taught all of his kids Greek and Latin, and they all became teachers and started a literary society in Stockton, California, in Sacramento. Les Belles Lettres. Yeah, they took a French name, sound classy, Les Belles Lettres, right? But that's my family. But because of rap music and its global influence from the cultural war enemies, they thought my people were ignorant. They thought my people were rappers. They thought all the Black people were rappers. They knew nothing of our history. Everybody Black wanted an education. They later said all the slaves wanted an education. But I tell you, slaves was one of the very first culture war strategies. When the Europeans started to write a history and create legislation that said all the black people were slaves, they were retroactively declassifying us as citizens of our own nation. They were retroactively making us subject to laws for former slaves. Because when you read John Blansingame's slave narratives, you will see that a lot of black people in the South didn't even see white people. They didn't even see the Europeans. But what does it do to you? When you think that the Europeans brought you here, don't you feel obligated to them? Don't you feel like, well, if you brought me here, you must be better because you're the reason I'm here. So I owe you a tax. I owe you. That's all to create an obligation. So one of the first culture war strategies that worked here was telling the black Americans of the East Coast that they had been slaves brought here by the Europeans. And then creating laws to govern the freed slaves when there hadn't been slaves. But the freed slave becomes euphemism, European language for black Americans. So if we see the myth of slavery as the first culture war inflicted upon our people, and we see rap music as the last culture war inflicted upon our people, because we're helpless now. We're in a state now where Tina Ainley can put me in jail or hang me up in her judicial system. We're in a state now where my own people can be shooting weapons at me in an American concentration camp. And my own family, the psychopaths and sociopaths cultivated and rewarded in my own family, can be my enemy. Because believe me, when the Jesuits identified my stepfather and let him come to America, they knew that the heiresses of America would be looking for an intelligent, ambitious medical doctor to marry. They knew he would be bait among my people. They knew it. And just the way that they imported Asians to occupy stores in the ghetto to create hostilities between the blacks and the Asians. So we would never say, hey, you know what? They hate you as much as they hate me. And China's next. So maybe we should, see ourselves as allies. No, they wanted to undermine that, right? So then you hear these stories about black people killing Korean grocery shop owners and Korean grocery shop owners murdering blacks that they think are criminals. And this becomes all right, this inter-ethnic American war scene between the immigrants who were given economic rights over the real Americans and the resentments that created. Well, just like they deliberately created those situations, nail shops that can open up in every single ghetto for the Koreans and the other Asians, but the black Americans can't get any kind of business. They can't even get training to do black hair in the beauty schools that give the licenses that the state demands. So you don't even learn how to do your own hair or develop your own hairstyles. Everything oriented towards the European. And the state licensing, the higher education accreditation and credentialing processes, all of these are elements of a culture war that force the people to a point where they cannot get ahead in their own society, in their own culture. Okay? So it all kind of foams up into European government, licensing, higher education credentialing, industries, giving licenses to immigrants to make the money, letting immigrants occupy higher technology and keeping the Americans out or in the lowest technical realms of the technical education. So that's pretty much the threatening parts of culture war. So here's kind of where I'm going to end this, because I'm at an hour and 14 right now. This is where I'm going to end this. Developing nations that are going to adopt European created technologies like the iPhone and the Pixel phone and the internet itself. Be warned. Be warned that a done-for-you high technology system is the beginning of your end through culture war. because you don't know what the Europeans have put in there. You don't know what's in those Starlinks of Elon Musk and the other Nazis and what they're projecting down on us. And you don't know the lies they're telling and the ways they're using machine learning to create the myths, like the myth of slavery, and then promulgate it all over civilization. It'll be better than music. It'll travel farther than rap music. Okay? So my advice to nations that have not been taken over like the Americas have been, North America's pretty much taken over. Okay? Look what they're done. Look what they've done to me. I'm a bioweapon tester. I'm a bioweapon test victim. That's what they've done to me. And I'm an heiress of American land that's rich in wealth. And my mother left even more land and money to me. And my stepfather, even more land. But my stepfather was a psychopath. They knew he was a psychopath. In South Africa, he was a dangerous criminal in the Midnight Raiders gang. I don't know if it was Soweto, but not far from Johannesburg was where he grew up. So when the Jesuits isolated him, it was just like when they isolated the man that founded the Mormon church. They found a brilliant psychopath. And the reason I didn't want to have children was because he knew he would reproduce psychopaths. And he did, through my mommy. Both his sons are dangerous psychopaths, both of them. So look at how culture wars works on the micro level of the individual, and how immigration can be used to import an enemy that sits right beside you, an enemy that gets into your bed, an enemy that procreates and creates children that become enemies of America themselves. You see how insidious it is? And they've had hundreds of years to plot it out and to plan it, and hundreds of years to perfect it. And they perfected it on me and my people. So that now in Mexico, they can install a shine bomb and overnight change family dynamics. Overnight, they have the next generation Malinche. Is it Malinche? They have the next generation of invader, right? The first one was La Malinche. I think I'm saying it wrong. La Malenca? Well, okay, I'm saying it wrong. I hope that you have learned and know the right name for it. La Malinche is the wrong name for it. That's not the right name. I'm off in the wrong, making mistakes again. But you are getting my point that there's no way in any way but hell that a shine bomb woman with a tranny voice could be elected by the people of Mexico, the real Mexican people. But she can facilitate the European nationalist supply chain and make sure that the resources of Mexico are privatized and the Mexican people are targeted for the same kind of genocide that they're putting on me. Because those Mexican people are on the land now. They're growing their crops now. They're on the land now, living, having families, being happy. Just like my family was in North Carolina and South Carolina, Polk County. Just like we were before the Ku Klux Klan and the immigrants that procreated and made me my color and my mixed racedness before they came in. And the Europeans that came in my family came in at exactly the same generation in Texas and North Carolina. They invaded my bloodline in exactly the same generation. Okay? On both sides of my family in two different localities, Europeans procreated with American Indians and made me mixed race. But I'm not a danger to my race. I'm a danger to the enemies of America. I don't mind being mixed race. I like being mixed race. I like being a hybrid. It's fun. But I don't like knowing that the Europeans, the pure ones, are my enemies. And the pure Europeans have been enemies of mulattoes since the beginning, since they first got here. Okay? Pocahontas and La Malinche. I can't get her name right. The same strategy of invasion. The same strategy of invasion. So now I'm kind of wondering, are the Chinese moving into Africa with the same kind of strategy of interbreeding to make their way in, and then they want to have a superior culture and a superior economy? And I wonder this. But when I look at Africa and China seems to have a lot of room for growth. And they seem to have a lot of love and a lot of respect for family. And I don't know, if it's just what I'm seeing, but I'm hopeful. And I know for a fact that if somehow we are able to defeat the European strategy of culture war, that other cultures coming up, integrating, building global economies will understand you cannot destroy the native culture. You cannot destroy the native people. You cannot supplant the native people and take all their stuff and privatize all their property. The native people will welcome you to become a part, to integrate with their race, to create new races of people, but not if you're criminals, stealing, killing, murdering, genocidal, not if you're the European mindset that we've seen. Okay, so that's where I'm going to end it. Culture war, the European problem, exopolitical diplomacy. This is my way of telling the good ETs exactly how we got here and who we are and who we were, so that they can understand exactly what we're dealing with when we're dealing with the European invasion of the world, of the indigenous peoples of the world. Thank you for joining me.